Okay, class. Today we will look at cardiac cycle. So you already learned the structure of the heart. So today we will continue to look at cardiac cycle. Okay? So when you say a cycle must be when you draw a circle, right? When you draw a circle, you start from one point, okay? And then you go through the cycle, you draw a circle, and then you end back to the same point. So when you say cardiac cycle, we are talking about the process in the heart. Okay, the process in the heart. So the process in the heart from one heartbeat to the next heartbeat. Okay, so after the next heartbeat, the whole process will repeat itself again and it come back to zero and then it repeat again itself again. So cardiac cycle is a sequence of events in the heart to complete one heartbeat. So it's a process, okay, to complete one heartbeat. And after that, you repeat again another cycle and another cycle. So it's a process that occurs between one heartbeat and the next heartbeat. Now, what is your average heart rate? 70? Any one of you 50 something? Yes, very good. One. Any one of you 60 something? 70 something? Anyone with 80 something? So today you go and measure your heart rate and see. Usually athletes, those people who exercise a lot, their heart rate will be lower. Okay, below average. So average is 70 beats per minute. They can be lower. It can be 60 something, can be 50 something. Because they have trained their heart enough so that their heart will not have to work so hard when they exercise. Okay, they've trained their heart good enough. So when the heart pumps, they can pump out a lot of blood and therefore they don't have to pump so many times per minute. So therefore, exercise rate is how many beats per minute. So when you exercise, it depends on how strenuous is the exercise, it can increase. Okay, average 125 beats per minute. Now, will you be able to calculate one heartbeat takes how many seconds if I give you this information? Can, right? When you're relaxed, your one heartbeat is 70 divided by 60. So that will give you, 60 divided by 70. That will give you how many second per heartbeat? Okay? So this is 60 divided by 70. You're okay? Okay? Yeah. So before we start, in order to understand cardiac cycle, okay, in order to explain cardiac cycle, changes during cardiac cycle, we must know what govern the change, okay? So, number one, what affects the opening and closure of the valves during a cardiac cycle? So there are how many valves here? You see, between atria and ventricle is AV valve, right? Between ventricle and the arteries is the semilunar valve. Okay, so whether the valve will open and close depends on two things. Number one, valve arrangement. So valve arrangement refers to what? Whether the valve is arranged this way, okay, or that way. Second way, this way. Okay, so this way or that way, the valve. And then number two, pressure on both sides of the valve. Okay, say for example, I ask two of you, one stand outside the door, one stand inside the door. Okay, let's say I ask Tyson to stand outside the door. Then I ask Alfian to stand inside the door. Then I ask them to push. Okay, ask them to push the door. So I've got the door here. And then one person will be pushing outside the door. Push. So this is who? Tyson. So Tyson pushed the door. Then inside you got Alfian. Alfian pushed the door. So tell me whether the door will remain closed or open. So let's say if Tyson pushed stronger than Alfian, what happened to the door? The door there. Remain closed. Okay, remain closed, that door there. What if Alfian push stronger than Tyson? The door will open, right? So whether the door will open or close depends on the pressure on both sides of the door, right? So same here. So let's say pressure on top is stronger than pressure at the bottom. So pressure on top is stronger than pressure at the bottom. What happens? The valve open or close? Higher than bottom. So the valve will open, right? Same thing. Pressure on top stronger than pressure at the bottom. Valve open or close? This valve open or close? Close, right? So why this one open, this one close? Because the valve arrangement is different. Okay? So why open and close? Because this pressure here higher than here, so open. This pressure higher than here, so it pushes these two valves to close. So therefore close. Okay? So therefore, when you want to explain cardiac cycle, what happened to the valve? You must first know the valve arrangement. Which orientation is the valve arranged? And then what is the pressure on both sides of the valve? And therefore, the valve will open or close depends on these two factors. Okay? So this is the first criteria to describe cardiac cycle. Now, second criteria is you want to know what affects the pressure inside the chamber. So you want to describe how the pressure inside the chamber as well as the arteries will change during different stages of cardiac cycle. So what affects the pressure? Of course, number one, systole or diastole. So when the heart contracts, when the heart muscle contracts, of course, the pressure in the chamber increases, right? Okay. When the heart relaxes, then the pressure will drop. Okay. So systole, so during systole, so I draw. So during systole, black color better. So during systole, okay, so let's say ventricle systole. Of course, the muscle contracts and squeeze the chamber, so the pressure will increase. And then during diastole, right, the muscle, the cardiac muscle will relax, correct or not? So therefore, the volume inside the chamber increases, so the pressure will drop. Correct? So pressure in the chamber increase and drop because of systole and diastole. So systole and diastole affect the pressure in the chamber. So what is the second factor that affects the chamber? Blood volume. Okay, so imagine you've got a bag. You imagine you've got a bag. Now you fill the bag with water. So you have a bag. So you start to pour water into the bag. So as the volume of the water increases in the bag, what is the pressure that you can feel as you hold the bag? You can feel the pressure of the bag increasing because of the volume. Are you squeezing the bag? No, but is there a pressure in the bag? This pressure is because of what? The volume. So as more and more blood collects inside any of this chamber here, the pressure will increase. So therefore, what affects the pressure in the chamber? Two things, whether it's systole or diastole, and also the blood volume. Okay, so these are very important factors for you to describe how pressure changes, whether valve open and close during different stages of cardiac cycle. So this is the most important thing. Once you know this, cardiac cycle, very easy to explain. So let's talk about cardiac cycle first before we explain the changes of the pressure and the valve. So cardiac cycle is divided into 4 stages. Number 1, atrial diastole. This is when atria relaxes. Number 2, atrial systole. This is when the two atria contracts. Number 3, ventricular systole is when the ventricle contracts. Number 4, ventricular diastole is when the two ventricles relax. So 4 stages. Okay? So diastole means relaxation, systole means contraction of the cardiac muscle. Okay, so let's talk about what happened during atrial diastole. Okay, so the two atria, the muscle will relax, okay, because it's diastole. So the atrial pressure is low because of diastole. So at that time, pressure of atria is lower than pressure of ventricle at the beginning of atrial diastole. Pressure in atria is actually lower than pressure in the ventricle. So in that case, does the valve open or close, the AV valve? Pressure in atria lower than pressure in ventricle. So pressure in ventricle higher, no? So the valve open or close? So the AV valve closed. So both the AV valve closed because pressure in the ventricle pushing upwards is higher than pressure in the atria pushing downwards. So the AV valve will be closed at the beginning. Okay? So then what happens? AV valve will be closed at the beginning. So at that time, at the same time, the blood continues to flow into both atria from the vein. So from vena cava to the right atrium, and from the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. Okay, so blood continues to flow into the atrium, and hence the atrial pressure will start to increase because the volume of blood increases. Okay, so as the blood collects in the atria, atrial pressure will increase. So now when the pressure in the atria increase until it becomes higher than pressure in ventricle, what happened to the AV valve? Open, isn't it? So the blood collects, the pressure increase until it becomes more than pressure in ventricle. The AV valve will open, and when it opens, the blood automatically will flow from atrium to ventricle passively, because at that time the two atria are still relaxed. The two atria, they are still relaxed. So the blood flows in passively. Okay, shortly after the blood flows in passively, the atrial muscles will contract. So this is a starting point of atrial systole. So the atrial muscle will contract to squeeze the remainder 30% of the blood into the ventricle. So 70% of the blood flows in passively. 30% means the remainder will flow in when atrium contracts. Okay? So now 0.1 second after the atrium contracts, ventricle will contract. So why there's a delay of 0.1 second is because we need this 0.1 second for the blood to empty into the ventricle. So when atrium contracts, there will be a 0.1 second delay. The timing of delay is for the remainder blood in the atrium to be empty into the ventricle. And after that, only the ventricle will contract. Okay, so there's a 0.1 second delay. So after that, ventricle muscle will contract. So when it contracts, the ventricular pressure will increase, isn't it? So it will increase until pressure in ventricle becomes higher than pressure in the artery. So this is the pulmonary artery, and this is the aorta. So pressure in ventricles, these two ventricles will be higher than pressure in the both arteries. So the semilunar valve will open, isn't it? Because pressure here higher than here. Pressure here higher than here. So this semilunar valve will open. Okay, so AV valve will, correct. Semilunar valve will open. Okay, what about my AV valve? Because pressure in ventricle now higher than pressure in atrium, what happened to my AV valve? Open or close? Close. AV valve, open or close? This one higher than here. So this one, close. So when the AV valve slam close, when the AV valve slam close, you will suddenly hear a pressure like you slam the door close against the frame. You will hear the sound, the slamming sound, boom, like that, right? So in the heart, it will create a sound called the loop. You know, a heart sound called loop, 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 loop. So why there's a loop sound is because the AV valve closes. So the valve touch each other. So you know, left side is bicuspid or tricuspid. Left side of the heart is bicuspid or tricuspid. Bicuspid, Remember in my video, I explained that bicuspid will close tighter than tricuspid. Bicuspid will close tighter than tricuspid. Tricuspid, the spot in the middle is a weak spot. You touch it, all the three flaps are open already. So because the left side of the heart, the pressure is stronger, you need a bicuspid here. The right side of the heart, the pressure is weaker, is lower. Therefore, tricuspid it will still remain closed, even the pressure is high. Okay, so when the pressure in ventricle is higher than the atrium, the bicuspid valve will close here, the tricuspid valve will close here. So that create the first heart sound loop, because the two flaps or the three flaps, they touch each other when they close. So when they touch each other, then you get the sound. Okay, loop sound. So this animation is to show that, okay, now the heart is relaxed, the blood flows in and then goes in and then it contracts and this one contracts. This one relaxes, and the blood flows in. So blood flows in passively and then contracts to squeeze. This is very fast. So you go back and see how the heart and the valve open and close. Okay. So now we go to ventricular diastole. So after ventricle systole is ventricle diastole. So what happened to ventricle muscle? So the ventricle muscles will relax. So when you relax, what happened to the pressure in the vessel versus ventricle? So pressure in the vessel means the aorta here and the pulmonary artery become higher than in the ventricle. So pressure here higher than here. Pressure here higher than here. So what happened to the semilunar valve? Open or close? Pressure top is higher than bottom. Close. Pressure top higher than bottom. Close. So semilunar valve will be closed. Close, right? So when it close, got sound or not? Got. Semilunar valve, the flap touch each other and you get the doop sound. Your second heart sound. Doop. So therefore, loop doop, loop doop, loop doop, loop doop, loop doop. Okay? Loop doop, loop doop. So you get the doop sound. So the pressure in ventricle is still higher than pressure in atrium. Now at the beginning, when ventricle relaxes, right? The pressure in ventricle is still higher than pressure in atrium. Why? Pressure doesn't decrease from 120 to 0, correct or not? It takes time to slowly decrease. So while the ventricle is relaxing, the pressure that builds up here is still higher than here. So these two AV valve remain closed. So it remains closed, okay? So now, this is the end of the cardiac cycle. You prepare for the next cycle. So now both the atrium and the ventricle, they are relaxed. So when they're relaxed at the beginning, the AV valve is closed. Then we start the next cycle, okay? So now, recap before we go to the graph. So our heart is a muscular bag. It acts as a pump to pump the blood around the lungs and also around the body. So the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. Okay? So one heartbeat to the next heartbeat is one cardiac cycle. And in one cardiac cycle, there are 4 stages. 4 things will happen. Number 1, atrial diastole. Number 2, atrial systole. Number 3, ventricular systole. Number 4, ventricular diastole. So now we want to study cardiac cycle using the graph. This is the one that you want to learn using the graph. So I will start from atrial systole, which is easier for you to follow the graph. Okay, I'll go through the entire cycle, but I prefer to start from atrial systole first because it's easier to understand. So what does the graph here shows? Y-axis show the pressure in the heart chamber and also the blood vessel in kilopascal. X-axis shows the time in second during the cardiac cycle. Okay. Now, what are the lines inside the graph shows? Red color line shows the pressure in the aorta. Blue color line shows the pressure in left ventricle. Okay. Green color line shows the pressure in left atrium. So we are only referring to the left side of the heart in this graph. the changes of the pressure in the left side of the heart in one complete cardiac cycle. So we're going to study that. All right. So we start with atrial systole here. Atrial systole first. Okay. So now atrial systole, you can see that in the chart of the heart here, the two atria contracts. Can you see it contracts? So it curves inwards here, showing that atrial systole is happening. So when atrium contracts, it will squeeze the remainder of the blood from atrium into the ventricle. So when it squeezes the atrium, what happened? You see, imagine that you're holding a bag filled with water. So I'm going to draw the bag here. So you are holding a bag filled with water. Okay? And then you start to squeeze the bag, both sides. So you're holding the bag with your palm and you're squeezing this two bag with your palm. So when you squeeze the bag, what happened? What do you feel on both your palm as you squeeze it? Does the pressure increase or decrease? Increase, right? You can feel the pressure increasing as you continue to squeeze. So hence, you can see it shows here the pressure in the left ventricle, the green color line, you see this green color line start to increase. Now, why is it as you continue to squeeze? Actually, you squeeze from here all the way to here. But why is it when you continue to squeeze, the pressure starts to drop? Now, pressure in the heart chamber is governed by what? Pressure in the chamber is governed by what? Two things. Number one is governed by systole or diastole. So now the atrium is experiencing systole. Okay. What else governs the pressure? Blood volume, right? Volume of blood in the chamber, right? So now at the beginning you squeeze because of systole. Because of systole, the pressure increases. So because of systole, the pressure increases. Right? So because of systole, the pressure increases. Now, what happens as you squeeze the blood? The blood can flow out from the atrium, into the ventricle. So imagine you make a hole, or you make a hole here. So as you squeeze, of course, you can feel that the pressure increases. But then up to one point, when enough blood flows out already, so the blood volume is dropping already, you start to feel that you're still squeezing it, but the pressure continues to drop. I'm still squeezing it. Okay, it's becoming smaller and smaller, but the blood continues to flow out. The pressure will drop even though I'm squeezing it. So it is still systole, but sorry, the blood volume dropped so much that the pressure will drop already. I'm still squeezing it. So therefore, I squeeze, the pressure increases as the blood goes out. But when enough blood goes out, I'm squeezing it, but the pressure drops already. Okay, so what governs the pressure? Both the systole and also the blood volume. So that's how I use these two factors to explain the changes, increase or decrease. Okay? Can I? Okay, so during atrial systole, atrium contracts and pumps the remainder of the blood into the ventricle. So this is the period of time from here, it goes up and goes down. Right to the bottom here is our atrial systole. Okay? So about 0.1 second after atrial systole, ventricle systole will happen. So this graph is not so accurate. It's about 0.1 second after atrial systole, ventricle will systole. So what happens when ventricle, so in this chart here, it shows ventricle systole, correct or not? So you see it curves inwards, right? Ventricle systole. What happened? Pressure in ventricle increases linearly. So the pressure will increase linearly. And then what happens? Pressure in ventricle now is definitely higher than atrium. So what happened to my AV valve? Pressure in ventricle increases higher than atrium. What happened to my both AV valves? Close, isn't it? So when the valve closes, What do you hear? Lup or dub? Lup, the first hard sound. Lup. Okay, the AV valve close. The two flaps or the three flaps, they close and touch each other. So you hear the first hard sound. Lup. Okay? First hard sound, lup. Now, yes. So as you squeeze the ventricle, okay, as you squeeze the ventricle, what happens? The blood cannot go out from the heart yet. You see why? So this is a starting point when the ventricle contracts. So therefore, the pressure in ventricle is which color line? Blue. So look at the blue color line. So after atrial systole, ventricle systole. So the pressure in the ventricle increases. Okay? But the blood remains inside the ventricle. Why? Because you see, the pressure in the aorta is red color. The pressure in ventricle is blue color. What happened to pressure in aorta versus pressure in ventricle? My pressure in aorta is still higher, right? Than pressure in my ventricle. Yes, my ventricle is contracting, but too bad. Pressure in aorta is remain higher than ventricle. So therefore, at this area here, my blood cannot go out because the two semilunar valves remain closed. So I'm squeezing the bag, but the blood remains inside the bag. So the pressure increases linearly. So when will the blood able to flow out from the heart? Is when the pressure in the ventricle becomes higher than pressure in aorta. So from this point onwards, the blue color line goes higher than the red color line, right? So this is when pressure in aorta becomes lower than pressure in ventricle. So now, pressure in ventricle is higher than pressure in aorta. So this valve can open already and the blood will flow out. Correct? So you see what happened when the valve open up? So when the valve open, can you see that the blood pressure in the red line and the blue line becomes the same? Can you see or not? The blood pressure in both the blue line and red line becomes the same. Why? Because the two spaces are connected already. Remember, the valve is open already, right? The space in the ventricle and the space in aorta, they are connected already. So what is the pressure inside here? The blood flows in here will bring in the same pressure. So when this valve open, whatever pressure you have here will be the same as this because both are connected. The pressure of the blood here comes from here. They are the same. So therefore, blue line, red line remains the same. So now because of that, you will know the point when ventricle starts to relax. Okay, you see or not? The point when ventricle starts to relax is when these two lines start to deviate away from each other. Can you see or not? The point when the two lines becomes the same is when they are connected. When are they connected? When this valve is open. When will this valve close? When the pressure on these two locations deviate from each other. They become different already. Why are they different? Because they are no longer connected. Why they're not connected? Because this valve closed. Okay? Can I? Okay, so when the pressure in ventricle goes higher than in the atrium, semilunar valve will open and then the blood will flow into the aorta. So the blood volume will drop. So I haven't finished yet. You see, pressure increase linearly when you squeeze the ventricle. Until the pressure in ventricle higher than aorta, the pressure open, the blood starts to flow up. So what happens when the blood starts to flow up? You are squeezing the ventricle at the same time the blood flows out. So you start to feel that, yes, the pressure is increasing, but then the gradient of the curve is decreasing already. is become less steep. The gradient of the curve is becoming less steep because the blood volume drops. You are still squeezing it. You are increasing the pressure, but the blood volume at the same time is dropping. So therefore, the pressure does not increase linearly anymore. The gradient starts to become less steep because the blood flows out until it becomes like this and it starts to go down. The gradient starts to go down because the blood volume drops. So the blood volume drops until a point where now you start to feel the pressure is dropping already, even though you're squeezing it. Okay? So that's how it changes up to here. So blood flows into the aorta, the blood volume starts to drop. Okay? So pressure in ventricle increases because you're squeezing it, but it slows down because the blood goes out and then it decreases because the blood volume drops. Okay? So this is the timing of ventricular systole. Right? Okay, now, so this is timing of ventricular systole. So when is ventricular diastole? So from this point, when the blue and the red line start to diverge from each other, this is starting point of diastole. Very easy one, very easy. Why? Why do they diverge? Because at the time, suddenly ventricle relaxes, and then the pressure in the ventricle becomes higher than the pressure in the aorta. Okay, pressure in ventricle becomes lower than pressure in aorta because ventricle relax. Okay, ventricle relax, pressure in ventricle lower than aorta. What happened to semilunar valve? The pressure here is higher than the pressure here. So the semilunar valve have to close, isn't it? Okay, it will close. So when it close, what happens? You hear the second heart sound. Doop. So, okay, semilunar valve close, the valve touch each other, and then you hear the second heart sound. Doop. Okay, and then what happened? So ventricle pressure will drop because ventricle relaxes. The pressure in aorta will actually decrease because the blood flows away from aorta. Okay, can you see that pressure in aorta also will drop because the blood volume drops? Why? Because the blood flows away. Blood flows away, volume drop, pressure drop. Okay? Okay, so you see, the ventricle relaxes already, right? But the AV valve remain closed. Can you see or not? Both AV valve remain closed when ventricle already relaxed. Why? Because the pressure in the ventricle here is still higher than the pressure in atrium. You see, the blue color line is the pressure in ventricle is higher than the green color line, the pressure in the atrium, and hence this AV valve must close. So it remain closed, even though ventricle is relaxing. So when will it open? When the pressure in the blue color line goes below the pressure in green color line. So at this point is when the semilunar valve will open. So during this time, can you see that the blood collects inside the atrium? Okay, the blood from the vena cava and pulmonary vein will start to collect in the atrium. So the blood will start to collect. So the volume becomes higher and higher. Okay. So the pressure also becomes higher and higher until the pressure in the atrium becomes higher pressure in ventricle. Then this AV valve will open already, right? When it opens, 70% of the blood will flow in passively. Okay, at this time, both atria and ventricle are relaxed. Both atria and ventricle are relaxed. Okay? Can, huh? So, just now we are describing the graph is left side of the heart. This graph shows the pressure on the right side of the heart. Yes. Question? Okay, you see, right side of the heart. Right. What is the thickness of the left side of the heart compared to right side? Left side of the heart is 4 times thicker. So you see, left side of the heart during ventricle systole is 16 kilopascal around. Right side of the heart, how much should it be? Okay, left ventricle peak systole is 16 kilopascal. Right ventricle peak systole is how much? 4. Okay, let's see, is it 4? Yes. Around 4. See or not? This is right ventricle, around 4. Thank you. I'm recording. Yes, I'm recording. Yes, I already pressed. Okay? Yes. Okay? Now, this graph, important, we want to see the ventricular volume. Volume of blood in ventricle. You see, 70% of the blood flows into the ventricle passively, followed by atrial systole to squeeze the remainder. Okay, 70%. The remainder 30% from atrial to ventricle is during atrial systole. Okay, after that, 100% of blood inside the ventricle. Okay, ventricle volume 100% already. Now, at this point, ventricle starts to contract, but the blood volume remains 100% in the ventricle. Why? Because the blood cannot go out yet. The blood can only go out when the pressure in the ventricle goes higher than pressure in the artery. You see? At this point, ventricle contracts already, blood cannot go out because why? The pressure in ventricle is lower than pressure in artery, so the semilunar valve remains closed. When the pressure in the artery goes higher than, pressure in ventricles goes higher than pressure in the artery, semilunar valve open, that's when the blood starts to flow out. So from 100% blood goes all the way down to 0% at the end of the ventricular systole, which is this point here. You see, when the semilunar valve open, the pressure in artery and also the pressure in ventricle are the same until ventricular diastole. The semilunar valve closed, the pressure on both sides, artery and the ventricle becomes different. Okay, so you see, at this point, ventricle already relaxed, but the blood volume remains 0 because no blood flows in. When will the blood flows in? When the pressure in ventricle goes below pressure in atrium. At this point, see not? Pressure in ventricle goes below atrium. That is when semilunar valve open. At this point, blood flows in, so blood starts to collect. How many percent? 70% flows in passively before the next atrial systole to squeeze the remainder 30% in. Okay?
We use the limiter HG, millimeters of mercury for standard unit.
Both ways. They will not ask you to code, so don't worry. Now, this is a very good slide for you to recap everything about the cardiac cycle because it comes with the numbering and also the description. So please pay attention to number 3, isovolumetric contraction. Isovolumetric contraction means when the ventricle contracts, the volume of blood inside remains the same. So this is during the linear. When the line increases linearly, this is the period of time. Number 3 means isovolumetric contraction. Okay, ventricle contracts, but the volume remains the same because the blood cannot go out from the ventricle until its pressure goes higher than the aorta. Okay, so what does this graph shows you? It shows you what happens to the valve during a cardiac cycle. So you see, when AV valve opens at this point, the pressure on both sides of the valve becomes the same. When AV valve closes, from this point onward, the pressure on both sides of the valve becomes different. When semilunar valve open, just remember the moon is at the sky. The moon is at the sky. So this is on top here are the semilunar valve. So the bottom must be AV valve. The moon is at the sky. Okay. So at this point, the valve opens. That's why the two lines becomes the same. And when the valve closes, the two lines become different. Very easy to identify. Okay. So when the AV valve closes, okay, when the two lines diverge away is because they are separated, the valve closed, it gives you the first heart sound loop. And then the semilunar valve closes here, right? The line diverged already, so it closed, they separate them, they got different pressure. So you get the second heart sound, doop. So very easy to actually know. This graph includes the heart sound. When you get the first heart sound S1 and the second heart sound S2. So doop, 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 doop is when the two valves close. This valve close here, this valve close, semilunar valve here, and then the AV valve here. Okay? Now, this one, I can present cardiac cycle in different way other than the graph. I can use the bar. The bar to indicate when is systole, when is diastole, when does the AV valve open, where does the AV valve close. Okay, very easy. So atrial systole here. Atrial systole, you see the graph goes up and down. So this atrial systole here. Ventricular systole, the graph goes up and down to here. So this is ventricular systole. What about AV valve close? AV valve close here, the point where the two lines become different. So these two lines become different. AV valve close until when it becomes the same here. These two lines become same. So close from here to here. Right, close from here to here. Now, what about semilunar valve open? Open here, see now, open, the line becomes the same all the way until it becomes different here. So open from here to here. Okay, very easy to see one. Okay, so now I'm putting both the left side of the heart and the right side of the heart together to see. Maximum pressure in left ventricle is 4 times of pressure in right ventricle. So this one is a peak, is 16 kilopascal. This is peak, 4 kilopascal, because difference in the thickness of the cardiac muscle on left and right ventricle. Okay, so the pressure, it depends on the muscle thickness. Okay, so you see, the peak of the left ventricle versus the atrium. Left ventricle is 16 times of atrium. That means the wall of the left ventricle is 16 times the wall of atrium. Okay, atrium only gives us 1 kilopascal. This is also 1 kilopascal because left and right atrium, same thickness. Left and right atrium, same thickness. Left ventricle, 4 times thicker than right ventricle. So 16 versus 4 kilopascal. Okay. All right. So therefore, we have completed cardiac cycle. Okay, that's all. So that's all for today. You have completed cardiac cycle. Thank you, everyone.